A man was sitting at a table in a very, very crowded diner. In fact, there was somebody at every table in the entire restaurant and a line going outside. He made his order of his food, and of course it was taking a bit longer for the food to arrive than normal. And as he sat there waiting for the food to show up, a man came up and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, we're all backed up here, and I see that nobody is sitting here with you. I've been watching for a little bit. Do you mind if I sit on the other chair at this table and place my order?" And the guy said, "Sure, no problem. Have a seat." Well, a little bit later, the food showed up for the first fella, and he thanked the waiter and everything else. "Everything's okay. No, I don't need any more iced tea now." Okay, that kind of a thing. And all of a sudden, he closed his eyes and he bowed his head, and in silence he gave thanks and praise to God for the gift of the food and gratitude for all the blessings in his life. He said the grace before meals, in other words. And then he picked his head up and opened his eyes. Well, the fellow across from him said, "Do you have a headache?" And the fellow said, "No, I don't have a headache." "Is there something wrong with your food?" "No, there's nothing wrong with my food." "Well, what was all that about?" And he said, "Well, I was bowing my head in silence and giving thanks to God for the blessings in my life, including this food. I was saying grace before meals." And the other fellow responded, "Oh, you're one of those. Well, I don't give thanks to anybody. I work hard for my money. By the sweat of my brow, I earn my money. So when I sit down to eat, I don't feel the need to thank anyone." "Oh," the other man said, "you're a lot like my dog. He does that too." There's no record in this story that the guy got up and left at that point. But was busy. He probably stayed there anyway because he couldn't get a chair anyplace else. Anyway, today's readings. Samaritan, Naaman, the army commander of the king of Syria. Now, by now, you know from preaching and everything else that Samaritans and Jews, well, they hated each other. And perhaps you don't quite understand why that hatred was so deep. So I thought I'd just take a minute to explain that once and for all. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, after Solomon, the empire broke up into north and south. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered first by the Assyrians, not to be confused with the country that Naaman was the army commander for, Syria. Anyway, and they deported a lot of people. Now, the Assyrians were very, very cruel people, even worse than the Babylonians, who would come in later to Judah. They would scatter people that they conquered all over their empire so that they would kind of lose their ethnicity and their background and their heritage. And then they would bring in all kinds of people from other parts of their empire and repopulate the area they just conquered. So what would happen is the people that remained behind, this case in Israel, now had for their neighbors and everything else all these foreign pagans, and pretty soon they started intermarrying, and pretty soon the religion that the northern kingdom of Israel had in that area had become syncretized with pagan practices. So they they weren't any longer really Jews in that sense of the word. Also, after the Babylonian captivity, when the people came back to Judah, they asked these people from Samaria to come down and help rebuild the temple, and they refused. From that point on, the Samaritans and the Jews, they just hated each other. The feeling was mutual. Remember the Samaritan woman at the well. So they were thought of really as foreigners. They were foreigners. Naaman himself was a foreigner. And they had three things in common: this Samaritan, whose name we don't know, and Naaman, the army commander that we do know. The first was that they both were indeed foreigners and despised. The second is that the people of Israel would have been despondent, angry, that their God had actually healed somebody who was not deserving, a foreigner. And the third thing they had in common is, even though neither one worshiped the God of Israel, they knew who healed them. The God of Israel healed them. Okay? Now, the Samaritan may not have known exactly who Jesus was, but he knew that it was through Jesus that this God of Israel had healed him of his leprosy. So he came back to give thanks for that. In that culture, think this way. The Samaritan was the client, God was the patron, and Jesus was the broker in the deal. And so he came back to say thanks because of that. Okay? Naaman would do the same thing in a little bit different way. So the Samaritan, though, came back to thank Jesus because he thought he would never see him ever again, and he would go back to where he came from. The other 9 who were Jews, by the code in Leviticus, had to go to the temple to show themselves to the priests and offer the sacrifices so that they could be returned to the community. And they could worship in the temple again because the priests would pronounce them healed of their leprosy. Plus the fact that they would figure they may run into Jesus again sometime, and now they owed him a favor because he brokered their healing. But back to Naaman. And I'm sorry that Naaman's story has been so compressed. About 2 weeks ago, I think, at Daily Mass, we heard the real story. You see, Naaman shows up with a scroll from the king of Syria for the king of the country. And when the king opens it, he says, "Oh my God, he wants to fight a war with us. He's telling me I should cure this guy of his leprosy." I can't cure this guy of the leprosy. I couldn't even cure him of gout if he had gout. What am I supposed to do? Well, he finds out that there's a prophet in Israel called Elisha, who was the successor of Elijah. Okay? And so he goes to see him. And Elisha sends a servant to him and says, "Oh, just wash in the river Jordan and you'll be okay." And Naaman says, "Hey, I got better rivers than this back in Syria, and they haven't done anything to cure my leprosy. I'm not going to do this thing," he says. And a servant girl who happens to be Jewish says, "Oh, no. This is a very, very powerful person that sent this word. Do it." And he does, and he's cured. So what does he want to do? He wants to pay Elisha as the broker of the God of Israel in this cure. And of course, Elisha doesn't want anything for it. Think about it. Isn't that what we do sometimes? Somebody does something nice for us. What's the first thing we do? We reach for our wallet, don't we? True life story. Albuquerque. You know I get Albuquerque in here. Okay? I'm in Albuquerque, and I thought I needed a left directional signal bulb. Okay? I won't explain why. That's another story for another time. Okay? And so I take it to Pep Boys. And a nice guy greets me at the desk and says, "Drive one into the bay," and the guy will look at it and they're, okay. He comes back to me and says, "You don't need a bulb. It was just loose. No charge." So what did I do? I took my wallet out, gave him $5, said, "Buy yourself a soda." And the guy at the desk, "Here's $5," because they could have lied to me and just replaced the bulb. They didn't have to do that. But that's the way the people in Albuquerque are, by the way. And I drove off. Okay? So I did what Naaman wants to do. But Elisha says, I'm not in this business for pay. Okay? I do God's will. That's pay enough. That's a good thing for us priests to think about. Just do God's will. Don't worry about the other stuff. Okay? And so he says, "Well, give me 2 carts of soil." Now you're probably saying, he didn't want to bathe in the Jordan. Now he wants 2 carts of dirt. Why? Well, it was thought in those days you could only properly pray to a god of a country in that country. So if you're in Israel, you pray to the God of Israel. You're in Syria, you pray to the gods of Syria, so on and so forth. So he wants to take this soil back so he can create a sacred space. a place to put a little altar, so that from that point on, he'll show his gratitude to the God of Israel who healed him by praying on that soil. Okay? Us Christians should begin and end a day, a prayer, or even a life with thanks and praise to God, shouldn't we? With gratitude. When we look around in our country, is there much gratitude publicly given to God? Thanks to God? I don't think so. It's a lot like that guy in my opening story that made such a fuss. You see, today's gospel invites us to take a look at ourselves. Are we giving proper thanks and praise to God, showing proper gratitude to God? First of all, for who He is. He's God, and guess what? We're not. Okay? Then for what He does. His gift of life, His gift of love, His gift of mercy, His gift of His Son, Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that He sent His only Son. Now, Thanksgiving, believe it or not, is just around the corner. And finally today, I felt like it was fall for the first time. There was a nip in the air. I'm saying, thank God, it's finally fall. And maybe we'll keep a little chill in the air and be reminded that fall is coming. Now, on Thanksgiving is one day in this country, right, in which everybody's supposed to give thanks, right, between the turkey, Macy's parade, and all the football games. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is telling us that you and I need to develop an attitude of gratitude. We have to make thanksgiving and praise interwoven into the very fiber of our existence. For as the prefaces tell us, it's our duty in our salvation always and everywhere to give thanks and praise to God. And I think that a lot of this idea of gratitude is Jesus telling us we have to acknowledge that God is God and we're not. And one of the best ways to express that gratitude is by giving back to God.